The monologues present the Fizzy Fuzzy Chronicles, a fictional true crime series inspired by Fizzy Fuzzy Big and Buzzy, the iconic album by The Refreshments. What you're about to hear is a reconstruction of events, interviews, recordings, rumors, half-truths, and very, very few good ideas. It's a story about love, sort of. It's a story about crime, definitely. And it's a reminder that sometimes the people you run from are the same ones you run toward. This is the Fizzy Fuzzy Chronicles. And yes, it gets worse from here. Sometimes the road to ruin isn't a sudden drop. It's a slow, grinding descent. A steady erosion of choices made in desperation and faith misplaced in the wrong people. For Jack, Diane, and Charlie, that descent began long before they hit the border. But crossing into Mexico, that was the point of no return. Mexico, a name whispered like a promise, painted in their minds as a land of escape, of freedom, a place where the weight of their crimes couldn't follow. But promises like that are illusions, and illusions crumble when the light hits them. Reality? Reality doesn't care about borders. It was already closing in, one choice at a time. On the road south, the adrenaline of their spree was gone. In its place, silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. Each mile carried the echoes of what they'd done. A family injured in a crash, hotel clerks bleeding on the floor, lives upended in their wake. They weren't just fugitives anymore. They were outlaws. The kind you read about in headlines and watch fall apart in the end. And yet, Diane clung to her fantasy. She saw herself as untouchable, spinning plans on the edge of madness. Jack, he was starting to see the truth behind her promises, the cracks in the foundation. And Charlie, well, Charlie was waking up to the reality that being a passenger doesn't mean you aren't complicit in the wreck. Now this part of Fizzy Fuzzy Chronicles takes us to the edge of the storm. Mexico looms ahead, shimmering like a mirage. But it's not salvation waiting for them, it's the beginning of the end. Their pasts are catching up, their illusions are breaking, and the choices they make now will determine everything. Dark times lie ahead for Jack, Diane, and Charlie. And as their story unfolds, one thing becomes clear. Some storms you can't outrun. This is the Fizzy Fuzzy Chronicles, Part 5. Buckle up, 'cause the storm is coming.
It was after midnight, and everything was still. That desert quiet, where the air feels heavy, and even the stars seemed smug. hanging up there like they're untouchable. Jack and Diane, they were passed out in the motel room. Their breathing, I guess, rough and boozy. I stood there, looking at them, and thought, this is it. If I'm gonna leave, it has to be now. You see, I couldn't do it anymore. The robberies, the running, the lies, it wasn't just dangerous. It was like I'd been hollowed out piece by piece. Funny thing is, way back in high school, Jack and I used to talk about hitting the road, chasing those sunsets and living wild. This wasn't freedom. It felt like a trap. And every mile we drove, the walls felt like they were closing in tighter. I kept telling myself I was just along for the ride, but by then I knew better. I wasn't just a passenger, I was part of the wreck. So I left. Didn't pack much, just my bag, some cash I'd stashed, and the clothes on my back. Made it look like maybe I'd gone for a smoke or a walk, just something casual. But every step out the door felt heavier, like the weight of everything I was leaving behind was trying to pull me back. And when I reached the road, the interstate was right there, a ribbon of black cutting through the desert, promising nothing and everything all at once. I thought about waking them up. I even took a step back toward the room. But what was I supposed to say? Hey guys, I'm done running for my life. Good luck? Jack would have rolled his eyes and lit a cigarette, and Diane, she would have stared me down like I'd stabbed her in the back. I didn't owe them an explanation, and they sure as hell didn't deserve one. So I turned around and started walking. It took hours for someone to stop and pick me up. A guy in an old Ford, cigarette hanging from his mouth like it was glued there. His dog in the back, looking at me like I was lunch. He didn't ask questions, I guess, and didn't want answers. Just gave me a nod and let me climb in. He dropped me off at a diner outside Tucson. I ordered coffee and a plate of the cheapest food they had. And I sat there, staring at the door every time it swung open, half expecting Jack and Diane to walk in and drag me back. But they didn't. And then, over the counter TV, I saw it. This detective, Watts, I think, standing in front of some reporter's mic, talking about Jack and Diane like they were public enemy number one. He called them reckless and dangerous, talked about the injuries they'd left behind, the lives they'd ruined. Oddly, he didn't mention me. But he did mention a reward, $10,000 for information resulting in their capture. I don't know what hit me harder, the bounty or the fact that he was right. You see, I'd spent so much time convincing myself I wasn't like them, that I wasn't part of the damage. But I was. And now they weren't just Jack and Diane. They were targets in a manhunt. But when the sun started to rise, I felt free. Scared out of my mind, sure, but free. And for the first time in years, I wasn't worried about what came next or how much trouble was waiting for me down the line. I didn't know where I was going, and that was okay. But even now, I can't forget the way their faces looked on that screen, plastered under the word wanted. The thing about the interstate is, it doesn't care where you've been. It doesn't care where you're going. It's just there, stretching out ahead of you, daring you to keep moving. And for the first time, I took it up on that dare.
Charlie left through the back door of that motel like a ghost. But ghosts don't leave trails. And Charlie? He left one right to their doorstep. You see, Jack and Diane weren't just running from their crimes. They were running from the man who refused to let them go. Detective Robert Bobby Watts was the kind of cop you didn't see much anymore. A throwback, a relic, a man who ground his way through cases with grit and instinct instead of technology and shortcuts. He wasn't flashy, he wasn't a hero. But he knew how to stay on a case like a dog with a bone. For Watts, this wasn't just about justice, it was personal. His career had been built on almosts. Almost cracked the big case, almost got the promotion, almost made the headlines. But every time he got close, someone else swooped in to steal the glory. And now, at 53, Watts wasn't chasing legacy anymore. He was chasing redemption. The case of Jack and Diane wasn't supposed to matter. At first, it was just another robbery, another messy lover's spat turned criminal. But then, the chaos started spreading. The dive bar, a bloody hotel clerk, a string of wreckage that left people hurt and Watts looking like he'd lost control. And to make it worse, they made him look stupid, slipping through his fingers right under his nose. But for Watts, this wasn't about the embarrassment or the department's reputation. It was about something deeper. The way Jack and Diane flaunted their recklessness in a world where consequences should have pinned them down. They weren't just breaking the law, they were spitting in its face. And Watts wasn't gonna let that slide. So while Jack and Diane chased their mirage of freedom, Watts chased them. Every lead, every witness, every sleepless night spent piecing together their trail. To him, they weren't just criminals, they were a symbol of every time someone got away. And this time, Watts wasn't gonna let that happen. Jack and Diane were running out of time, but so was Watts. He needed this win. Not for the press, not for the department, for himself. And when the dust finally settled, he wanted to be the one standing, the one who brought them in, the one who proved, once and for all, that he wasn't just the guy who almost got the job done. This is Detective Watts, the man who refuses to quit, even when the world tells him he probably should.
Did they get away? Yeah. Jack and Diane slipped through. It happens. But don't mistake that for them winning, or a loss on my part. From the start, they weren't typical. Most criminals make mistakes, trip over their own mess. Jack and Diane, they thrived in it. Sloppy enough to leave chaos behind, but just smart enough to keep out of reach. They weren't masterminds, but they were slippery, and slippery is worse. Slippery leaves people bleeding and lives ruined. What started as a bar robbery spiraled into something else. Clerks left in pools of their own blood. A family in the hospital after a high-speed chase. They didn't just break the law. They burned every rule in the book. In the media, they ate it up. Modern-day Bonnie and Clyde. Heroes for a broken world, right? Yeah, no. They weren't heroes. They were selfish, reckless, and dangerous. And no, we weren't ready. Mekong was a mess. The crash sites on the interstate were worse, and my team was chasing their own tails while Jack and Diane had already vanished into the horizon. Okay. Could I have handled it differently? Maybe. Called in the feds sooner. Locked down the border faster. But when you're in the thick of it, you don't have the luxury of hindsight. You make decisions, you follow the trail, and sometimes you lose. But nobody runs forever. See, what gets me isn't just that they ran. It's how they ran. Like the rules didn't apply. Like the people they hurt were collateral damage in some grand adventure. That's what I can't let go of. They didn't just break laws. They spat in the face of accountability. But every mile they drove, every town they passed, was just another thread in the web they were weaving around themselves. They didn't know it yet, but their luck was already running out. Jack and Diane weren't ghosts. They were flesh and blood. And people leave trails. Mistakes. When they do, I'll be there. Why didn't I follow them into Mexico? Simple. Jurisdiction. You don't cross that line without clearance unless you're trying to make an international mess. But just because I couldn't cross the border doesn't mean I was done. If there's one thing I've learned, It's that patience pays off. And then there was Charlie. Found him in a diner outside near the border, looking like he hadn't slept in days. The poor bastard was sitting there, muttering into his coffee like it could save him. I almost didn't recognize him. Skinny guy, nervous energy, hands shaking. But when he looked up and saw me, yeah, that was the moment his luck ran out. The funny thing about luck, there's a way of turning when you least expect it. Mine just did. Jack and Diane thought they were untouchable, but the road ends somewhere. And thanks to Charlie, I now know where.
While Detective Watts pieced together their trail, Jack and Diane settled into a small village on the other side of the border until what they thought was freedom. Mexico, their mirage, a place where the weight of their crimes couldn't touch them. But mirages are only tricks of light. Reality doesn't change just because you've traded one side of the line for the other. The small, sun-bleached town they landed in should have been a haven, a reset. Quiet streets, cheap motels, 1,000 ways to disappear. But Jack and Diane didn't find salvation. They found themselves trapped in the heat, the silence, and the cracks in their bond. For Diane, Mexico was supposed to be the start of something bigger. For Jack, it was a suffocating reminder that no matter how far they ran, they couldn't escape the mess they made. Or each other. And the longer they stayed, the clearer it became. Their partnership, once fueled by passion and adrenaline, was starting to fray under the weight of their choices. This wasn't a new beginning. It was a purgatory. A place where resentments burned as hot as the sun and desperation hung thick in the air. For Jack and Diane, it wasn't the escape they hoped for. It was the beginning of the end.
Crossing the border should have been a clean break. A new start. But the second we stepped into Mexico, I knew it wasn't going to be that simple. The air felt heavy. Streets were too quiet. Like even this place didn't want us here. Diane kept telling me, "We made it, Jack. We're safe." We weren't. We were just farther away from the wreckage and the people we left behind. Charlie? Hell, I couldn't stop thinking about him. The way he was spiraling before we even crossed the border. I was like watching a dam crack. You just knew it was going to burst, just not when. He thought I was asleep, and I should have said something. Done something. But instead I just let him walk away. Which might have been my way of saying sorry.
Jack thought too much. He was always staring out the window or wandering the streets like he'd find some magic answer out there. Meanwhile, I stayed in the cantina down the road. The beer was warm, the company forgettable, and nobody asked questions. That was enough for me. But even as I sat there trying to figure out our next move, I couldn't stop thinking about Charlie. I hated admitting it, but I was worried about him. He'd been unraveling for a while, muttering about guilt, about how this wasn't what he signed up for. I kept telling myself he'd pull it together, but what if he didn't? What if he did something stupid?
I'd walk past the cantina sometimes and see Diane through the window, laughing with strangers like none of this was real. Meanwhile, I was out there trying to keep my head above water. One day, I ended up in some bar across town, and there was this girl. She wasn't Diane, and that was the whole point. I told myself I could forget everything for a while. Diane, Charlie, the mess we'd made. But forgetting doesn't come easy. A few drinks later, I was stumbling back to the motel reeking of shame and more bad decisions. Diane didn't say anything when I walked in. She didn't have to. That almost made it worse.
Jack thought I didn't notice, but I saw it all. The stumbles, the guilt etched on his face, the way he avoided my eyes. I didn't call him out because I didn't know what to say. Jack always ran from his problems, from me, from himself. And now we left Charlie behind, or he left us. Either way, I couldn't stop thinking about it. What if Jack wasn't the only one running? What if Charlie ran somewhere else, straight to the cops? He wouldn't do that, would he? No, I had to believe he wouldn't. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we were just an inch away from the edge.
Every time I walked into that motel room, it felt smaller. Like the air was running out. Diane would be sitting on the edge of the bed, staring out the window like she was waiting for something. Or someone. To save us. I guess I knew she was thinking about Charlie, even if she didn't say it. I was too. I didn't want to believe he'd give us up, but the thought was always there, gnawing at the back of my mind.
Jack wasn't saying much, but I could see it in his face. He was thinking about Charlie just like I was. The kid never had the stomach for this kind of thing. I kept telling myself he'd stay quiet, loyal, but I wasn't so sure anymore. I didn't know how far guilt could push him, and the idea of him sitting in some diner spilling everything to a cop, that used to keep me up at night. I needed to believe Charlie would keep it together, but the truth? I didn't even know if we could.
Mexico wasn't freedom after all. It wasn't salvation. It felt like a waiting room. And every minute we spent here, I felt the walls closing in. Diane kept saying we'd figure it out, that everything would be fine. But I didn't believe her anymore.
I could feel Jack pulling away, even if he didn't say it out loud. And as much as I hated it, I couldn't blame him. None of us were built to last like this. Not here. I just prayed to whatever was listening that Charlie would keep quiet. For his sake, not ours.
I'd like to say I'm patient by nature, but the truth? This case had been gnawing at me. Jack and Diane weren't just another pair of criminals. They were a damn puzzle. One piece missing here, another bent there, and every time I got close to solving it, they slipped away. Mexico was their big move, their escape hatch. But it wasn't a getaway. It was a gamble. And gamblers like them, they never know when to quit. Charlie. Poor kid. He didn't belong in their world, and I think he knew it. What I've learned over the years about guilt is, it eats away at you. It chews on the edges until there's nothing left. So when I found Charlie in that diner, I knew his luck had run out. Hell, maybe even mine had turned for once. He didn't say much at first. But when he started talking, the floodgates opened. One word, one detail, one mistake. It was all I needed.
While Detective Watts waited for the storm to break, Jack and Diane were already standing in the eye of it. Mexico wasn't the haven they hoped for. It was the beginning of their undoing. The choices they made, the cracks in their bond, and the weight of their guilt were already pushing them toward the inevitable. Charlie, he was just the first domino to fall. His guilt, his fear, his desperate need to escape, it all led him straight into Watts' open arms. So with Charlie's betrayal, the threads Jack and Diane had been holding onto began to unravel. The world they built, fragile and reckless, was collapsing, and there was no stopping it now. Part 5 ends here, on the cusp of chaos, but the story is far from over. The inevitable conclusion is waiting just around the corner. In Part 6, the storm hits. Consequences catch up, and for Jack and Diane, the road they've been running on finally reaches its end. This is the Fizzy Fuzzy Chronicles. The reckoning is coming. This has been a Stranger to Reality media production, starring Darcy Thompson as Charlie McGregor, PJ Marino as Detective Watts, Christian Ledley as Jack Trumaine, and Michelle Miller as Diane Parker. The Fizzy Fuzzy Chronicles is a work of fiction. All characters, events, and locations portrayed are either products of the author's imagination or used fictitiously. Any resemblance to real people, places, or events is purely coincidental. And if you think otherwise, maybe it's best you keep that to yourself. Thank you for listening, and please stick around for the final chapter, because the reckoning is coming.